great. How are you, Killian?
Pretty good. Yeah, it's evening here in Norway. It's been there for a lot of hours yet, but I think it's around midday. You are in US right now, right?
I am in the U.S. right now. It's 3 in the afternoon, and it's still light out, but like in an hour and a half, it'll be dark.
Okay, yeah. So a bit, yeah. You have a bit more like that than here in Norway right now.
For sure. We're only like at the 45th parallel. I think you're a lot
Yeah, a bit higher. Yeah. So yeah, just to introduce Hillary, she's a great skyrunner. She's been winning most of the more important races of the calendar. An amazing mountaineer too. She's very good on all the technical stuff, and she works at Korea in Mont Blanc, that is a research center that looks for the biodiversity and the alpine ecosystems in the Alps, and it's an excellent occasion to talk with her about what are those environments, why it's important to preserve them, and what are the roles as that we have as runners, as trail runners or climbers, all the outdoor practitioners, because I think that it is no one that is better placed than you to talk about these two worlds, that they are very connected, but many times I think as runners, we don't realize how fragile they are, and that is important that we take care of them. You are back. Yeah, I'm back here.
I lost you for a minute.
Just
Are you back?
Is no one better placed than you for talking about the environment and the biodiversity and the runners, like what that we need to realize that they are very fragile ecosystems.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that obviously there are a lot of people who can speak to this issue, but it's certainly something that I care a lot about, and it does take part of my work. And then, like you, I spend tons of time in the mountains, and it's something that we see, that we live, and biodiversity is a huge issue that, I mean, no offense, Pascal, but like plants and animals are important too.
Exactly.
Not just glaciers.
Yeah, no, it's true that we were talking just before with Pascal about the importance of glaciers in the ecosystem. But yeah, sure, we are part of this ecosystem, but we are more connected to the biodiversity. So like the other animals, the other plants, the different ecosystems. Yeah, and as I said, like you've been working on that for years, and you have been seeing the changes as a runner when you go in the mountains, and also on the different research that you have been seeing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, so right now I'm in the US and I am from the US, but I do live full time normally in the Chamonix Valley in France. And I think that, that's certainly a place where you can see a lot of change. Change is happening really fast. And you can see that in the glaciers, but you can also see it in the plants and animals. And actually, I'm sure that you know this already, but climate change is happening about twice as fast in the Alps as it is in the rest of the Northern Hemisphere. So that accelerated change is visible, is very, very visible in the Alps. It's kind of on par with the poles.
Yeah, no, and
in the Arctic.
as you said, like we see these changes in the mountains, and all the activities that we do, they are harmful in a way. You might say that maybe like running, trail running, or mountain activities are some of the less harmful activities, but they have some impact, I think, too.
For sure, they absolutely do. I mean, I think that we all, we're all responsible in some ways. I do think that, like in terms of like an individual basis, obviously running completely in your like own power up and down a mountain is not the biggest impact. But we travel, we buy, clothes and gear and all of this. So it's definitely something, hikers, runners, climbers have an impact. And the way that I usually think about, biodiversity, I guess, is like you can think about it like on a really global scale, like, the world's biodiversity. And I think that it's something that's interesting having to do particularly with the mountains on a like global scale for biodiversity, is that the mountains only cover about 27% of the world's land mass, but about half of the world's biodiversity hotspots are in mountain environments. And in Europe, for example, 3%, only like across all of Europe, only 3% is covered by the mountains, but it's home to 25% of Europe's plant species. So that's pretty crazy. Like there's a lot going on in a really small area in mountain spaces. And the reason that is the case is that, like, basically, I mean, anyone who's spent time running up and down mountains like you do, like, that it's really different at the bottom than at the top. And when you have that kind of topographical change, where you're going up in elevation so much, you can get these climactic conditions that are different, that allow for different habitats, and so that allows for different species. And so that's why there can be so many different kinds of species in the mountains. You also get things like speciation, where like you know, in the last ice age, for example, different species were like isolated. And so, you know, between glaciers like that. And so they ended up evolving on their own. And like, so you get all of these, you know, kind of small changes.
Yeah, that's
and
amazing. And
evolved
it's often, I think, when we think about biodiversity and mountain environments, we might think about, yeah, the forests down by the valleys or the alpine forest. But it's not only there. Like even like in higher mountains, I has been in Himalayas, and you see like at 5, 6, 7,000 meters, it's animals. You look in the glacier, and in the snow, it's some animals, some bacteria. So it's all over. It's not only that we need to take care about these places on the forest, the bases, but it's from the sea level to the highest mountains. It's different species, and it's important to have that in mind, that it's not because it's only mineral that it's is meaning that it's not anything that we should take care of.
Yeah, for sure. I actually was going to say that, like, we oftentimes think about like high mountain environments kind of being devoid of life, and that's not necessarily the case. And I wanted to test your knowledge, actually. If so, when you go up Mont Blanc via the historic route, so you go up past the Grand Brûlé, on like the rock that the Grand Brûlé hut is on, how many species do you think, plant species, are present on that rock? It's at about 3,100
I
meters.
have
How
no
many did you
idea.
notice,
Like
anyway?
I will notice like just a few, like 2, 3 species. So I probably am very far from that.
Yeah, so there actually, so there was a plant survey done there last summer by a group of botanists and ecologists that I know and work with, and they counted 23 different plant species on the Gulf, which is, I mean, a lot. It's only up. That's only gone up since like the 1850s or 60s. It was 19 species even back then, and it's gone added another 4. But definitely these places where you think it's like this, you know, rock in the middle of the glacier, you'd never think that there were plants there, but there absolutely are. I think the highest vascular plant in Europe was on the Dom de Michigan in
way above 4,000. Yeah.
4,000. Yeah. And this is actually was pretty exciting this past summer. I was climbing on the Inominata Ridge, where you've also climbed, and we saw what is currently the highest plant seen in Italy at 4,100 meters. So there's definitely stuff growing up high. And one of the things that's interesting about mountains, right? And as we see climate change happening and we see things like glaciers melting, we're seeing plants and animals moving upslope. And so generally we'll see that in the Alps anyway, every decade, every 10 years, plants are moving 10 to 30 meters higher, and animals are moving about 30 meters higher per decade. So we see like kind of this upward march up the mountains. So in like the middle to short term, that's kind of good news in some ways because they have new habitat available. But as we know, like the shape of a mountain is such that it's like a cone. And so there's less and less space as you go higher up. So species that are like really well adapted to those environments are going to have less and less space. So like we've looked at the rock ptarmigan, which you probably know that species because I know there's a lot of them in Norway. It's considered an Arctico-alpine species. So in the last ice age, basically they came down on the snow and they went on these summits, and then when the glaciers retreated, they just like stayed up there. And that's why we have them in the Alps. And they're the ones, the birds that turn from sort of a brown, gray in the summer to a white in the winter for camouflage. And we're looking at in the Mont Blanc range that by the end of the century, they won't have any suitable habitat anymore.
Yeah, that's that's something that we really notice, I think, and people that is going every day in the mountains every year, that we see that the animals, they are like going higher, the plants too, as you say, the ecosystems are like moving higher, and even also I think in latitude, like we can see that the climate or like the ecosystems that they were a bit more south, they are going also a bit more north, so it's moving like more to the poles and more higher up. So of course, like it's losing the terrain, like the habitat for these different species. It's being smaller every time. So that's another consequence that we need to really think about climate change. It's not only about the carbon in the atmosphere, but it's also about like where is the place where all these species can live, and we are also one of those species. So even if we have technologies that makes our life more we are more flexible on adapting, but we are not endless flexible. So we are also losing place where we can eat at the end.
Yeah. Well, so I think that's, it's definitely interesting what you're saying, because, like, so for biodiversity loss at a global scale, the number one cause is habitat degradation. The second is invasive species, and the third is climate change. And of course, like, those are all connected as well. But what you were saying about, plants and animals are moving upslope, but we're also seeing, even if it's just for tourism, like, humans are going into the mountains. When you look at, I participated in or I translated a report on climate scenarios for the Mont Blanc range in the next 50 years, and we're getting more and more heat waves. So you're getting, like, just more and more people who are wanting to go to places in the mountains just, like, to stay cool. And so there is all the more pressure on these environments, because that's, like, the only place that's left for some of these species to live, and there are more and more people going to them as well. So it's all connected, but humans are definitely an important and highly impactful species in the
talking about that, like
ecosystem.
you said, that it's more people going to the mountains for different reasons. It can be to practice, it can be to be cooler. But when we go to the mountains, like, we can have this impact, and it's like when we are walking towards a natural area, we can be disturbing some different species. We can be walking on some plants, like we can be. So one thing that I find is it's very hard to get those informations. Like, if you want to get the information of what are the harmful practices in Chamonix area, or in the currents, or in the natural park in Catalonia, or in the Rockies in US, they are slightly different because the ecosystems are also different. So probably in some places you can take a bath in a lake, in some places that can be very harmful, and it's very hard, I think, to access to these informations, because you need to go through the national park website, or like the governmental website, and it's very it's not very user friendly to get these informations. But you have been working on that, so probably you have some of the tips that you can give to everybody to, okay, how to get these information, what are these practices that we should think about before going to a natural area.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that there isn't, like, one of the challenges is that there isn't, like, a centralized place to get all the information, right? Nobody has created for biodiversity the equivalent of what you made for uphill skiing and ski resorts. Like, there isn't one database with all that information. Maybe that's something, that should be created. But I think you know, it's important to learn about the local habitat where you are, but then there are also some essentially like kind of golden rules, I guess, that would apply to just about anywhere. Personally, I'm a big fan of the leave no trace principles, which leave no trace was developed in the U.S. And there are like 7 main principles. And again, as you said, like depending on where you are, some of those are like more or less pertinent, and some of the like big leave no trace principles in the U.S. Might not apply to Europe. But things like traveling and camping on durable surfaces is one of them, where like basically you say try to stay on the trail and or on rock so that you're not contributing to erosion. That's something that is generally like that works almost anywhere you are. Also, the idea of leaving what you find, like not picking like lots of plants and bringing things home with you. Again, like on an there's this individual versus global sort of thing to think about, where the individual impact, if you say like, you know, I'm going to pick one flower, it's not really a big deal, but if everybody does it, then it becomes a problem. And we have to be really sensitive to this stuff right now, because as you said, there are more and more people going to the mountains, both because they are, you know, wanting to get into cooler places, but also because I think our society kind of feels like we need that like nature more, and mountain sports are getting more popular. But so we have to start thinking now about like what would be the impact if everybody did the same thing. But those are some of the things, you know, disposing of waste properly, that's something that's important, both, you know, like trash and also human waste, because those are things that have system and all the different parts of the ecosystem. And so when we talk about biodiversity, it's plants, it's animals, it's microbes, it's insects, it's all of these different things. Another big one is about respecting wildlife. And, you know, you want to be not disturbing wildlife as much as possible. And I think that, you know, basic rules like don't approach them and run after them whenever you can avoid it. Certainly don't feed them. But then also, and particularly what you were speaking to, I think, for specific areas, is that you'll get some areas that are especially sensitive. And so that's where you have to be looking for really specific information. And the first thing I would just always say is like a lot of places will have like signs at trailheads and stuff, and like read those. like stop and, put your watch on pause and read those signs, because there are really important guidelines that are oftentimes given, like different areas will be put out for habitat restoration, like planting regeneration zones for different plants, or different wildlife reserves. And a lot of places will have seasonal protections in place for different species. So, for example, like climbing, you'll have places where maybe there are ptarmigan or grouse or different raptors that will be nesting. And so those you want to, like, sometimes of the year, you're going to like specifically not go there. Usually that'll be something that would be posted, but then you do like kind of have to do the legwork of being like, okay, where am I going? And usually there will be, as you said, government agencies or a lot of times NGOs that do management, and it'll say, no climbing in this area in the spring. Another thing for backcountry skiers that's pretty important is that they a lot of times will have at least like where I am in Chamonix, they'll put kind of signs up saying like, don't ski through this area because this is where grouse are overwintering. And in these really delicate times of year, like in the winter, they're pretty vulnerable. And so you really have to respect that. It can be hard because you're like, oh, it's a powder day. And like, there's no track there. I want to go. But those are the places, like when the rules are there, like you got to be thinking about, the big picture, and trying to respect that as much as possible. But I think, a lot of those things, when I think about what can we do for biodiversity, I think a lot of the things, like we can think about it either as like, I want to have it as little of an impact as possible, right? I'm going to like